10th of January 1979, Tehran. 6 in the morning. A pale winter fog rolls across the Alborz mountains and settles over the capital like a burial shroud. The streets are not yet full, but they are not empty either. They are watching. Thousands of Iranians line the roads leading to Mehrabad airport, not to cheer but to witness. Some hold flowers. Most hold their breath. Inside the Niavaran palace, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, King of Kings, Light of the Aryans, commander of the fourth largest military on earth, picks up a small cloth from his bedside table. Inside it, a handful of Iranian soil. He folds it carefully, puts it in his coat pocket, and walks to the door. He will never walk back through it. On one side of this story stands a man with 400,000 soldiers, a secret police force feared across 3 continents, fleets of American F-14 Tomcat fighters, and 25 centuries of Persian monarchy behind his name. On the other side stands a 76-year-old cleric in a black turban, sitting in a small rented house in the suburbs of Paris speaking into a cassette recorder. The cassette tape defeated the F-14. This is how it happened. To understand why an empire collapsed in months, you must first understand the wound that never healed, the one cut in 1953. That year, Mohammad Mossadegh, Iran's democratically elected prime minister, made a decision that would haunt his country for generations. He nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, a British monopoly that had been extracting Iranian oil for decades while most Iranians lived in poverty. Britain was furious. America was nervous. And so the CIA and British MI6 did what superpowers do when their interests are threatened. They manufactured a crisis, paid street thugs to riot, and toppled a democratically elected government in a coup they codenamed Operation Ajax. Mossadegh was arrested. The Shah, who had fled to Rome in panic when the coup first failed, was flown back on an American aircraft and restored to power as an absolute monarch. The message to every Iranian who was paying attention was permanent and unforgiving. This man does not rule by the will of his people. He rules by the will of Washington. Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi understood this, and it haunted him. He was, by any external measure, a modernizer. In 1963, he launched the White Revolution, a sweeping top-down reform program that redistributed land, expanded literacy, built dams and highways, gave women the right to vote, and dragged Iran's economy into the 20th century at breakneck speed. Iranian income skyrocketed. Oil revenues funded gleaming new universities. By the 1970s, Tehran had highways, discotheques, and a space program in the making. Western magazines called the Shah a visionary. He called himself Iran's de Gaulle. But watch how he enters a room. He does not look at faces. He looks above them at a fixed point somewhere above the crowd, as if the people before him are terrain to be surveyed, not human beings to be seen. That single habit tells you everything. He could build a nation's infrastructure. He could not feel its pulse. And in the shadows of every mosque, in every bazaar, in every seminary, in Qom and Mashhad and Isfahan, something was building that no highway could pave over. Ruhollah Khomeini did not look like a revolutionary. He looked like what he was, an old scholar, severe and still, with deep-set eyes that held no warmth and no fear. When the Shah's White Revolution threatened to strip the clergy of their landholdings and give women equal legal standing, a direct assault on the ulama's centuries-old power, Khomeini stood in his seminary in Qom and said what no one else dared say out loud. He called the Shah a wretched, miserable man leading Iran to ruin. He was arrested. He was exiled. First to Turkey, then to Najaf, Iraq. Then, after Iraq expelled him under pressure from Tehran, to a modest house in Neaufle-le-Château, a quiet village outside Paris. The Shah thought exile would silence him. Instead, it gave Khomeini a microphone the whole world could hear. What was at stake was not merely a throne. For 38 million Iranians, it was the question of who they were allowed to be. For the Middle East, it was whether a new model of governance theocracy fused with revolution could actually seize and hold a modern state. For the Cold War world, it was a nightmare scenario. A key American ally, sitting atop the world's second-largest oil reserves, suddenly becoming something no one in Washington had a category for. The terrain of this revolution was not mountains or rivers. It was architecture and sound. The bazaar, Iran's ancient network of covered markets stretching for miles beneath domed ceilings, was the nervous system of Iranian civil society. Inside the bazaar, merchants had financed mosques for centuries. They funded the clergy, fed the poor, and passed information faster than any newspaper. When the bazaar closed, the country stopped. The Shah's Savak secret police could infiltrate a political party. They could not infiltrate 10,000 stalls selling carpets and spices where every merchant had been doing business with the same family for 4 generations. And the mosque. Savak monitored universities, banned political parties, tapped phones, and disappeared dissidents into Evin prison. But you cannot arrest Friday prayers. You cannot jail the call to worship. The mosque was the one space in Iran where people gathered in numbers, heard the same message at the same time, and left together. It was functionally the only free assembly hall in the country. Against this geography, the Shah deployed his enormous American-trained force, 400,000 soldiers, the Imperial Guard, fighter jets, tanks, the Savak, with an estimated 60,000 informants and agents threading through every institution in the country. It was, on paper, one of the most formidable security apparatuses in the Middle East. But armies fight enemies they can see. Khomeini understood this. His weapon was invisible. From his house in Paris, he recorded sermons onto cassette tapes. His followers, students, merchants, pilgrims smuggled them into Iran by the thousands, hidden in luggage, sewn into clothing, buried in boxes of food. Inside Iran, a single tape was copied dozens of times, passed hand to hand, played in living rooms and basements and the back rooms of mosques. By 1978, millions of Iranians had heard Khomeini's voice, without him setting foot in the country for 14 years. There was no precedent for this. No government in 1978 had a strategy for defeating a cassette tape. But Khomeini's most devastating weapon was not the tape. It was the calendar. In Shia Islam, the tradition of mourning holds that the dead are commemorated 40 days after their death. When Iranian security forces killed protesters in the city of Qom in January 1978, firing into a crowd demonstrating against a newspaper article that had insulted Khomeini, the mourning ceremonies 40 days later drew larger crowds. When those crowds were fired upon, 40 days later, larger crowds gathered to mourn them. Each killing generated the next demonstration. Each demonstration generated the next killing. The Shah had unknowingly created a perpetual motion machine of grief and fury. And every time he tried to stop it, he poured gasoline on it. His advisors saw what was happening. They gave him 2 options: full military crackdown, martial law, mass arrests, shoot on sight, or genuine political concession. He chose neither consistently. He oscillated, 1 week repression, the next week reform. He replaced the hardline Savak chief. He released political prisoners. He lifted censorship. He apologized to clerics. And each concession told the opposition the same thing. He is afraid. He is breaking. Keep pushing. The night before everything changed, a 19-year-old conscript in the Imperial Guard sat on top of his tank in a Tehran street, watching the ocean of humanity flowing past him in the darkness. 1 million people, at least. Maybe more. He had been told the crowds were communist agitators and foreign agents. But he could see their faces in the torchlight. He recognized a man in the crowd, older, bearded, wearing a simple worker's jacket. It was his father. He did not raise his rifle. In his palace, the Shah sat alone in his study. He was 59 years old. He had been diagnosed with lymphatic cancer 2 years earlier, a secret he kept from nearly everyone, including most of his government. The man who projected absolute authority was quietly taking medication each morning that made him tired, foggy, slow. Historians would later argue about how much his illness shaped his decisions in those final months, whether the hesitation, the vacillation, the strange passivity were the failures of a flawed king, or the symptoms of a dying man. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither matters. The outcome was the same. He looked at the photograph of his father, Reza Shah, the iron-willed soldier who had built the dynasty from nothing, and made his decision. Phase 1. The spark, October 1977 to January 1978. It began not with gunfire but with poetry. For 10 consecutive nights in October 1977, writers, intellectuals, and poets gathered at the Goethe Institute in Tehran, the German cultural center, technically outside Iranian government jurisdiction, and read anti-government verse to packed, standing room-only crowds. Each night, thousands came. Each night, they left angrier and more alive than when they arrived. The Shah's government watched, uncertain. Poetry was not illegal. Crowds were not illegal. Not yet. Then, in January 1978, the government made its first catastrophic miscalculation. An article appeared in the state-run newspaper, Etalat, written, it was widely believed, at the Shah's direction, accusing Ayatollah Khomeini of being a British spy, a poet of erotic verse, and a foreign agent in disguise. It was so transparently absurd that it achieved the opposite of its intention. In Qom, Iran's holiest seminary city, seminary students poured into the streets in outrage. Security forces arrived. Shots were fired. Several students were killed, the exact number disputed, but the blood was real. The clock started. 40 days later, the 18th of February 1978, morning processions in Tabriz for the Qom dead turned violent. The crowds were larger than anyone expected. Government buildings were attacked. A bank was set on fire. Security forces killed at least a dozen people. The 40-day clock reset. Phase 2. The cycle of blood, spring and summer 1978. By spring, the pattern had taken on a terrible momentum of its own. Qom had sparked Tabriz. Tabriz sparked Isfahan. Isfahan sparked Shiraz. Shiraz sparked Tehran. The Shah's security forces were not fighting a movement anymore. They were fighting a calendar. But then came August, and everything accelerated past any hope of containment. On the 19th of August 1978, in the southwestern city of Abadan, 4 men barred the exits of the Cinema Rex movie theater and set it on fire. 422 people were burned alive inside. It was, at that moment, the largest terrorist attack in human history. The government immediately blamed Khomeini's Islamic radicals. The opposition immediately blamed Savak. The truth has never been definitively established. But it did not matter. The rage that followed did not require a verdict. It required a target. And the target was the Shah. 3 weeks later, on September 8, the Shah declared martial law. The next morning, a Friday, tens of thousands of people who had not yet heard the martial law announcement gathered in Jala Square in eastern Tehran. The Imperial Guard opened fire. The official death toll was 87. Opposition sources claimed hundreds. Whatever the number, the date entered history immediately. Black Friday, the point of no return. After Jala Square, the moderate voices inside the opposition, those who still believed the Shah could be pressured into genuine reform, who argued for negotiation rather than revolution, fell silent. The radicals had been right all along. There was nothing to negotiate. There was only the throne or the street. By then, the street had millions. Phase 3, the weapon of stillness, autumn 1978. In October and November 1978, the revolution discovered its most powerful weapon yet. Not protest, not violence, but absence. The oil workers of Khuzestan province went on strike. Not a slowdown, not a work to rule. A full strike. The pumps stopped. The refineries went cold. Iran's oil production, the financial oxygen of the entire regime, dropped by 80% in a matter of weeks. The Shah's government, which had been spending billions on military hardware and modernization projects, suddenly had no income. The treasury began to empty like a bathtub with the drain pulled out. Then the others joined. Teachers, factory workers, government clerks, bus drivers, bank employees. The entire apparatus of modern Iranian life ground to a halt. The Shah raised wages, promised elections, fired cabinet ministers, appointed new ones, dismissed Savak commanders, released more prisoners. He tried everything. Nothing stuck. Each concession was absorbed by the movement like water into sand, leaving no trace except a slightly lower waterline of royal authority. In December 1978, during the holy month of Muharram, the Shia season of martyrdom and mourning, somewhere between 6 and 9 million Iranians marched in the streets of Tehran in a single day. 6 to 9 million people. In a country of 38 million. On one day, the Shah sat in his palace and received the report. He had been told, as recently as September, by American intelligence, that his regime was stable. That assessment now seemed like a dispatch from another planet. He made his final decision. Phase 4. The departure. The 16th of January, 1979. The announcement came over Iran's national radio at 2 in the afternoon. His Imperial Majesty has left the country for a period of rest and vacation. For 3 seconds, there was silence across Iran. Then the country erupted. Millions poured into the streets simultaneously, in Tehran and Isfahan and Mashhad and Shiraz and every city in between. Statues of the Shah, the enormous bronze figures that stood in public squares across the country, were pulled from their pedestals. His portrait was torn from every wall. Street signs bearing his name were ripped down and set ablaze. Soldiers who had sworn oaths to protect the monarchy threw their rifles into the air and embraced the crowds. Some wept. The Shah's image, which had been on every banknote, every government building, every school textbook in the country, vanished from Iran within hours, as if the nation's memory was being physically rewritten in real time. At Mehrabad Airport, the Shah had paused at the foot of the stairs leading up to his aircraft. He turned to his Prime Minister, Shapur Bakhtiar, and said, "I give Iran into your care, yours and God's." Then he walked up the stairs. The aircraft lifted off. He looked out the window at Tehran below him, the city of his birth, the city of his father, the city of his dynasty, and the city looked back with 3,000 years of history and not a single tear. He never saw it again. Phase 5. The return, the 1st of February 1979. 16 days later, a chartered Air France Boeing 747 broke through the clouds above Tehran. On board, 176-year-old cleric in black robes, 120 journalists from every major news organization on Earth, and the weight of everything that was about to happen. As the aircraft taxied to the gate at Mehrabad, the same airport the Shah had departed from 2 weeks earlier, a French reporter leaned toward Khomeini and asked, on behalf of the entire watching world, "How do you feel, returning to Iran after 15 years?" Khomeini turned his deep-set eyes toward the window, a pause that lasted long enough to feel geological. "Hichi," he said. "Nothing." Outside, 5 million people were waiting. The streets from the airport to the Behisht Zahra cemetery, where Khomeini was traveling to honor those killed in the revolution, were so packed with human bodies that the motorcade could barely move. Reporters who covered it described the sound as something beyond noise, a sustained physical vibration that you felt in your sternum before you heard it with your ears. The Shah had 400,000 soldiers. Khomeini had this. On February 8, the Iranian Air Force officers came to Khomeini's headquarters and pledged their loyalty to the revolution. The backbone of the Shah's military was breaking in real time. On February 11, at 2:00 the afternoon, exactly 26 days after the Shah's departure, the Supreme Military Council issued a single statement. The armed forces of Iran declared themselves neutral in the conflict between the Bakhtiar government and the revolutionary forces. Within hours, every government building in Tehran had been seized. The prisons were opened. Bakhtiar fled to France, where he would be assassinated by Iranian agents 12 years later, answering his door in his pajamas. The courts stopped. The ministries emptied. The radio played revolutionary anthems on a continuous loop. 2,500 years of Persian monarchy ended not with a battle. With a press release. The battlefield, if you could call it that, was a country. And in the days that followed, it looked like one that had survived something it had not yet found words for. Estimates of the revolution's dead range from 540 to 2,000, according to independent researchers. The new Islamic government would later claim 60,000 martyrs, a number most historians reject, but which served the political purpose of making the revolution feel proportionate to its mythology. The true toll was smaller than most revolutions of comparable scale. This one had been won, in the end, not by the sword but by the strike, the tape, and the 40-day clock. Shapur Bakhtiar, the Shah's last prime minister, the man who had genuinely believed he could build a constitutional democracy from the wreckage, fled to Paris within days. He spent the next 12 years writing, speaking, warning the world about what he had watched unfold. In 1991, Iranian government assassins knocked on the door of his apartment. He opened it. He was stabbed to death in his hallway. The Shah's journey was slower and more painful. He flew first to Egypt, where his old friend Anwar Sadat gave him refuge. Then to Morocco, then to the Bahamas, then to Mexico. Each country that took him in came under immediate diplomatic pressure from Tehran to expel him. On the 22nd of October 1979, the United States admitted him for cancer treatment lymphoma, the secret he had carried through the final year of his reign. 52 Americans paid for that decision with 444 days in captivity when students seized the American embassy in Tehran 13 days later. Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi died on the 27th of July 1980 in Cairo, Egypt, in the guest wing of the presidential palace, as the guest of the only leader who had not abandoned him. He was 60 years old. He was buried in the Al-Rafai Mosque in Cairo, beside the remains of deposed kings. The peacock throne, 20,000 gemstones, rubies and emeralds and diamonds, set into carved wood and gilded metal, built for a Qajar king 2 centuries before the Pahlavis even existed, sat in the empty hall of the Niavaran Palace, looking out at nothing. The world that emerged from the 11th of February 1979 was categorically different from the one that preceded it. Iran's immediate transformation was staggering in speed. The country that had been America's most reliable Middle Eastern ally, the Shah had called the partnership between Tehran and Washington the cornerstone of regional stability, became, within months, an implacable enemy. The relationship between Iran and the United States, which had shaped the region since 1953, collapsed so completely that it has never been repaired. Israel lost its most important strategic partner in the Muslim world. Iraq, watching a Shia revolution succeed on its eastern border, panicked, and Saddam Hussein launched a full-scale invasion in 1980, beginning an 8-year war that consumed 1 million lives. But the longer shadow fell across the entire Islamic world and beyond. Khomeini had done something no one had done before. He had taken the theoretical framework of political Islam, the idea that Sharia law should govern a modern state, that clerics should hold executive power, and made it real. The Islamic Republic of Iran was proof of concept. It inspired movements from Egypt to Indonesia, terrified every secular Arab government in the region, and handed a template to political Islamists everywhere who had previously been dismissed as dreamers. The reverberations of 1979 run in a direct line to the Taliban, to Hezbollah, to every Islamist political party that has contested an election anywhere in the world since. And there is this. The cassette tape won, not just as technology, but as principle. A man with no army, no territory, no budget, and no institutional power brought down a regime with 400,000 soldiers by controlling one thing: the story. The revolution of 1979 was the first revolution in modern history in which information itself reproduced and distributed outside any government's control was the primary weapon. It was the prototype for everything that came after. Every revolution carried out via social media, every government toppled by a viral video, every regime that discovered too late that it could surveil its people but could not stop them from hearing each other. All of it has an ancestor in those cassette tapes moving across the Iranian border in suitcase linings in 1977. Decades later, the peacock throne remains where it was left. In a museum now, visitors walk past it in careful lines, taking photographs. Children ask their parents what it was for. The parents try to explain a world that no longer exists, a king of kings, a light of the Aryans, a man who held a fistful of Iranian soil on his way to a plane and was never seen in his country again. The throne does not explain itself. It simply sits, encrusted with its 20,000 gems, and glitters in the museum light, and waits for someone to remember that power built on foreign hands and fear, no matter how it shines. No matter how ancient the title, cannot survive the moment its own people decide, finally, to stop pretending to believe in it. The airport at Mehrabad still stands. They renamed it. The name on the sign now belongs to Khomeini.